Hello, YouTube. I I wanted to do, I guess, a bookend video here on my Kant series. Pause for laughter. Um, I and I want and I want to touch on two things. First, the legacy that Kant leaves, why Kant is important. And then on the other hand, some major criticisms of Kant, because I think that the Kantian system doesn't work, and everybody knows that it doesn't work, but it does. But in demonstrating that it doesn't work, um, there's like a surplus of problems that may or may not have ever been really dealt with. The analytic philosophers think they've solved some of these problems, and someone like Quentin Meillassoux and the speculative realists think that they may have gotten through some of the problems, but I'm a little skeptical on that. So, Kant's legacy, then, and I want to say that there are two sides, really, to Kant's legacy. The first is a re-evaluation of the relationship between subject and object, and the turn towards the subject, or the I don't want to say the privileging of the subject, that's probably too strong, but taking subjectivity seriously in terms of epistemology, right? That has effects, and very serious effects in the history of philosophy. And Kant was one of the first really modern thinkers, one of the first thinkers following Newton, at least, to try and give an account of subjectivity. That's what the Critique of Pure Reason really is. It's just to try and describe what subjectivity is and what effects that has in the world, or at least our perception of the world. There are a few, previous examples of focusing on subjectivity, right? Someone like Descartes, maybe. You could talk about the Stoics, you could talk about the skeptics, and there are a few accounts of mind, before Kant, obviously, but what I want to suggest is that Kant really became the benchmark, or the thing to surpass, I guess, for Enlightenment philosophy and beyond, in deep what subjectivity is, right? You could even say, and I'm sure some knowledgeable people might be, saying that this might be too strong of a statement, and it might be, but I'll say this in a really weak sense. You could even say that Kant lays the groundwork in this sense for someone like Freud, right? In the focus on subjectivity, right? Again, that might be too strong of a statement, but I think that you could make that case, at least. Then the other legacy that Kant leaves behind him is the notion of the transcendental, which is something that we really haven't, I don't think, escaped. And this is something that people don't get, right? Understanding transcendentalism, if you like, is key to understanding all of Western philosophy after Kant, even if they're arguing against the notion, like, say, the analytic philosophers were. I don't use that word in my videos on Kant curiously, because it's an important, it's a key term in Kant. What transcendental means is conditions of possibility, right? So, in order to understand the idea that in order to understand the question, for instance, in order to answer the question, does the human being have a soul, you have to first attack all of the conditions of possibility for that question even being raised, right? You have to describe the ground upon which, the ground of meaning. This is anachronistic to apply this to Kant, but the ground of meaning in which that question makes sense before you can even begin to attack the question of, does the human being have a soul, right? So this becomes a bigger and bigger issue, and I think certain things have been added to the transcendental. Kant, for instance. Well, this is I guess the first criticism that I would levy against Kant, and I've levied I've talked this out in the comments of one of the videos. But Kant's transcendentalism is kind of incomplete, right? First of all, what he doesn't recognize to be transcendental, right? What he doesn't recognize to be a condition of possibility of experience is history, the historical situation within which we exist. Kant is extremely ahistorical, and that, I think, is a problem. And that's one of the things that Hegel gets at. And I'm going to talk in a bit about Hegel's criticism of Kant, because I think it's one of the most interesting. Even if I don't necessarily agree with it, I think that Hegel in general is one of the most fascinating thinkers who ever lived. So it's ahistorical. Also, it lacks any analysis of meaning and language, right? And this is something that we see in the 20th century as what's called the linguistic turn. The notion that meaning is predicated on language, so in order to get at what questions are meaningful, what answers are meaningful, what ideas are meaningful, we need to therefore have a theory of meaning, right? So what's the condition of possibility for attacking philosophical questions? This is raised by Wittgenstein. The condition of possibility for attacking philosophical questions is having some grasp of what meaning is in the first place. So that's another thing that is added that I think can be plugged into the transcendental that Kant's just really lacking, and he's sort of a hostage to his time period in this sense. But the turn to the transcendental, which again, I think that you can see in Wittgenstein, right? The notion, again, talking about meaning and how this is a condition of possibility of philosophical inquiry and blah, blah, blah. Like that, there's something distinctly post-Kantian about that. You don't see that kind of question raised before Kant. So that turn, right? So the reevaluation of the relationship between subject and object, and to take that relationship seriously, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the turn towards the transcendental. These are two things that are indispensable to understanding the 19th century and the 20th century and beyond. That's kind of the legacy of Kant. Now, the criticisms of Kant, I gave one. Kant is sort of incomplete in his transcendentalism. Another one, which 10101 raised, and he's right to sort of raise it. He says, well, why say that the noumena even exists, basically? What's to stop you from falling into a kind of anti-realism, at least an epistemic anti-realism, if not necessarily an ontological anti-realism? The distinction being, we can't, if we can't access reality and we can't talk about reality in and of itself, why talk about reality, right? And I sort of go with that, actually. I'd not necessarily comfortable with labels, but I do have a certain sympathy with that kind of epistemic anti-realism, right? I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to deny the existence of the in and of itself, but I have a sympathy with the idea that it's inaccessible. My criticism here would be that for someone, and this is another statement I made in the comments section of one of the videos, for someone who spends so much time talking about how we can't talk about things in and of themselves, then when he gets onto his practical philosophy, he then spends a lot of time talking about the in and of itself. He's kind of chatty about about the noumena, even though he says that we can't be. That's something that's I think a real issue in Kant. Coming to grips with that, and I think there's plenty of neo-Kantians who would reject all of Kant's practical philosophy and stick to his practical reason, the second critique, and stick to his the first critique, at least the first half of the first critique. And the basic insight, reality out there is something crazy and chaotic, sort of. We can't get our heads around it, and the mind sort of organizes it, right? That's the basic insight. Plenty of neo-Kantians who will do that, but then criticize the move that, criticize everything that Kant then says about the noumena, right? I will say one criticism that definitely doesn't work. Someone posted it in the comments section. They called Kant a relativist, which is fucking hilarious, right? That's the kind of thing that would probably get a good laugh in a philosophy department, because Kant is trying to get at the structure of subjectivity itself. It's not about our different subjectivities as individuals. It's defining what it is to be an individual in the first place, right? So I'm going to do a video about relativism and how that doesn't exist. It's just a curse word that people throw around. To my knowledge, there's nobody who actually defends the view of relativism. But one thing that definitely doesn't come out in Kant is that all opinions about reality are equally valid or something like that. That definitely does not come out of Kant, and I think that that's what's usually associated with the word relativism. So Hegel's critique of Kant is at least, there are plenty of ways to give Hegel's critique of Kant. There are plenty of critiques that Hegel gives of Kant. Hegel is sort of obsessed with Kant in a certain way. But he is, in his own way, a Kantian, or a transcendental idealist, if you like. But Hegel's first critique of Kant is to say, all right, we can't talk about the noumena. We can't talk about the things in and of themselves, right? But to draw this line, to draw a definite line between the phenomena and the noumena, is to say something about the noumena, right? And so you can't quite do that as neatly as Kant wants to, right? So Hegel tries to sort of break down the distinction there. But then he goes on, and I think the real insight of Hegel qua Kant, right, would be something like, what's so great about the noumena? It's just out there. It's sort of formless and stupid. It doesn't it has no structure. It has no anything, right? Anything that we recognize as meaningful is not present in the noumena because we attach all the meaning to it. So, Kant still sort of clung to this notion that the noumena was some kind of ultimate. What Hegel wants to say is that no, the noumena is something just like raw material. It's just unformed crap. It's not. There's nothing special about the noumena. What the noumena needs is something to give it form, structure it, right? Us, in other words, right? The noumena needs what Hegel calls spirit, or Geist, if you like, mind. Those words are sometimes applied interchangeably in reference to Hegel. It needs, the objective, needs subjectivity in order to happen, right? Because everything about the word to happen is associated with subjectivity, not with objectivity. So we are the mechanism by which the objective realizes itself. It's not that out there is the stage for us to dance in, but rather we are the stage for the objective to realize itself in. And you can take this a number of different ways, and people have taken it a number of different ways. People have read this theologically, the notion that God is realizing himself through the subjective apprehension of the objective. People have taken it in strictly materialist ways and tried to give really materialist readings of Hegel, most notably Marx and most recently Zizek. And also Hegel views that realizing of the objective by the subjective, the apprehension of the object by the subject. He views that as something that is a historically unfolding process, right? And so he kind of tries to tell the story, at least in the phenomenology of spirit, for instance. He tries to tell the story of how consciousness has developed, and thereby give an account of everything, quite literally. And Hegel's system is so vast and so comprehensive, and at the same time so vague, that it kind of breaks under its own weight. But it's Hegel's probably the most important 19th century thinker. Because, if only because everybody is reacting against him after him, right? But yeah, that's Hegel's. Those are at least two of Hegel's critiques of Kant, and that's one way to think through Hegel's philosophy. There are plenty of others, right? But the idea that the noumena needs to become phenomena, rather than, it's not that we go into the noumena as immortal souls, which is perhaps a vulgar statement of what Kant was getting at, but still not necessarily inaccurate. It's not that we try the noumena, but rather the noumena needs, traverses into us. The objective needs the subjective in order to tell the story of it. So yeah, those are just some thoughts on Kant's legacy, and some critiques of Kant. And you can do all of these things, and again, another thing too is that someone attacked the views in the video as though they were mine. None of these views are necessarily mine. I'll leave you to figure out what I don't believe on the subject. But yeah, so have a good day.